Hello, everyone, and welcome to this beautiful evening that we are going to spend with Steve and Sally, who are the beautiful author of Jesus, the Ultimate Shaman. We got in contact many months ago because you reached out to me to offer me the book and say, hey, would you be interested to get a copy of the book? And on a fascinating subject, which is shamanism meeting the Christ. And so a religion, a big, religion in our world, Christianity, and the symbol of Christ, and shamanism, where personally, I've had many encounter with the Christ in my shamanic work. I've also spent time with many indigenous people, and many of them, in fact, despite they have experienced a lot of violence from Christianity, I've encountered the Christ in their ceremonies and as someone that brought light to their world and brought wisdom. So I want to put that out there here, that this is not about Christianity tonight. This is about Jesus. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that. And it is a bridge that we are going to try to make, because you make a very good point in your book between the Christ healing and ways and shamanism. And so for those of you that are new, and I don't think many of you are new on this podcast or YouTube channel as you're listening live, shamanism really derives from millennia of multicultural practices from all over the world that connect what we call the ordinary world or the middle world, the material world, to non-ordinary world of spirits, the upper world, the underworld. And today, most shamans and shamanic practitioners, they help people to connect with what we would call spirit, or what we call our spirit, or the creator, or God, or the universe, or the life forces that is moving it all or connecting it all. And it's been probably 20 or 30 years that shamanism has been really rising all over the world. There's a huge interest in the Western world about it. And so this book kind of cover many topics, and we're going to try to go through many of them tonight, and hopefully give you interest in that, and maybe getting the book from Sally and Steve. But first, let me say hello to you. It's time now. Hi, Steve. Hi, Sally. How are you tonight? Can you hear me well? Yes.
Good to be here.
Yes. So, Steve and Sally, before we dive into the book and the content and your personal experience, which I'm really interested in, with that work of shamanism and the bridge between shamanism and Christ, can you introduce yourself, each of you, and tell us a little bit about your upbringing and your path? I think we talked about it when we first chat together, but I'm very interested. What is your background and how you kind of weaved into that world of shamanism? And did you come from a very religious family? Did you have no idea who Christ really was, aside from knowing the name? So if you could, each of you, tell me a little bit about before the book. And for 4 or 5 minutes, as long as you want, what brought you to that? Where do you come from on those subjects?
Ladies go first.
Okay. I did not grow up in a spiritual family. My family didn't go to church. We didn't talk about the Bible. I was just taught to live by the golden rule, which is do unto others as you would like done to you. That was kind of our deal. But there was no reference to spirituality at all.
Mm-hmm.
I had problems in my childhood within the family. that were very traumatic for me. And when I was 10, my mom used to drive me. We lived way out, and she would drive me into the doctor. And we would pass by this church that was white with a big old steeple. And every time we drive by, something about that got me. I thought, I don't know anything about church, but I want to see what's going on in there. so, so
And
I
how old
will.
were you, Sally? Were you little? I mean, were you very little, or was it
I was
like
10.
more? Oh, you were 10. Okay.
I was 10. So I went in one day and I told my mom, I want you to drive me to that church. And she's like, huh? What do you mean?
Huh?
You what?
What?
I said, no, I want you to drive me to this church. I want to see what's going on in there. She's like, okay. So I encountered a very powerful spirit of Christ there. And I couldn't even tell you what drew me, except the spirit drew me there. And I had an encounter with God that was very personal for me. And what transpired out of that was many years of me finding comfort in knowing that I was loved, and I didn't have to grovel in the treatment that was not good in my family, but that I could be powerful and that I was loved and that I was not alone. That was the biggest thing, is that I was not alone. There was someone always walking beside me to give me wisdom and truth. I did a lot of reading in the Bible. That particular church was a very conservative Protestant church. And I attended there for a little while, but I mostly just spent time getting to know the Creator who created me through reading the Bible. And later on in my years, I became doing therapeutic body work. I'm licensed as a massage therapist for many, many years. And I had some wonderful mentors that taught me all sorts of things about spirit and connecting the body with our spirit, and how those two are so intricately woven together that what happens to one happens to the other. When there is emotional difficulty, when there's financial difficulty, it shows up in the body as a problem. And to be able to address those life issues that we all experience from time to time has been a wonderful gift for me to offer my clients. For some reason, along the way, and I don't even know how this happened, but my name got out there as someone who could address unusual circumstances. And I began getting referrals from doctors I didn't even know. I had a couple lightning strike victims. I had people that, one man who had fallen like 50 feet in his work from a large tower and broke almost every bone in his body. They couldn't manage his pain, and this doctor sent him to me. So I've had all sorts of experience in really unusual things. And I can honestly say that the spirit who creates us all, that there's a way of healing for all of us. And it isn't necessarily in a box. It's not in that conservative church I started out with. I think that our faith is bigger than that, in the Creator that can walk with us through everything and bring us healing, bring us people into our lives who can put us in the right path, that we can be whole again. So in that time, that's where I encountered shamanism.
Without knowing it, I guess, because a lot of things you describe are very connected to shamanic tools or ways, I would say, but it was not like I guess a formal training with a medicine man or a medicine woman, right? It came directly to you through spirits, right?
Yes, and I guess I consider some of my mentors people that were I would consider shamanic practitioners, even though they might not. Some of them might not consider themselves that label, but they brought truth and they brought wonderful wisdom in ways to address healing. And I think what that taught me was that you don't have to fit into any spiritual box to have a relationship with Creator.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be a Jesus person. You don't have to be a whatever person. You can be any person because we're all created by the same Creator, and we're all precious. So my history, I have, I'm from Six Nation, Six Tribe Nation. And I think some of my, when you ask about mentoring or shamanic, some of it came from that because they speak to me and I walk with them now in the ethers as they are with me all the time.
Seneca.
Seneca, right. Yeah.
Thank you, Sally. I have plenty of questions, but I want to let Steve answer a little bit, same as your background. I know you came to that, but I definitely want to come back on those encounters and how they manifested, and because I think there's a lot of doubt for many people in the Western world about spirit in terms of connecting to it, right? And I think that's what there is this call to religions or certain spirituality, because people want kind of a tool or a way or a confirmation, right? And it doesn't often happen that way. And I might share a little bit of my personal story on that. But Steve, was it also the same for you, that you were brought up without any background on that, or what is your story on this and this connection?
I'll share that. I just want to make a really quick point, which is, to me, what happens in churches that keeps people from stepping out in the spirit is a rationalism. It's the view that science and rationalism is the only worldview we can have that makes any sense. And that rationalism traps people into it just limits the way that they view things. But anyway, I'll probably come back to that. No, I was raised Catholic. I won the Altar Boy of the Year award in 8th grade. I'm pretty
what is that?
Damn proud
now
of
I
that.
have another question.
I'm strutting my stuff. No, it's I served as a altar boy for masses, doing masses. I got into high school and punted it, college punted it. Too much authoritarianism. And then I met a guy surfing and in California, and he had a Bible in his back seat, and I thought, recently graduated from college, as my duty to make absolutely the most fun I could of him. And finally, he challenged me to read it, and when I started reading it, I got into Matthew, and with all the philosophers, I was a philosophy major and a political science minor. Of all the philosophers that bickered back and forth, Jesus was like, "This is it." It's like, well, there's no argument there, and he just captured me. I mean, and I thought, I'm walking with you. I want to go with you. That led me to go to a Christian seminary, and I ended up pastoring a young married group and started an inner city ministry to El Salvadoran refugees in San Francisco. And then I eventually moved up into Eastern Oregon and ran a cowboy ministry for a number of years. And I kind of got all wrapped up, and I started doing therapy. But therapies psychotherapies are great, but there's always a limit to how deep they can go, because they typically target the cognitive and emotional, but they don't typically target the spiritual soul part of people. And so when I started, I did community mental health for about 8 years, and then I opened up a VA clinic for the VA in a small town. And that's really when I started searching, because the vets that I was dealing with, combat vets, were just torn up. I mean, they just were torn up. And I thought, there's got to be a deeper way to bring healing. So that began my search for shamanism. Somewhere in that whole process, I just quit Christianity, just said I'm done, and went on a long search, out, into Buddhism and Zen Buddhism and meditation practice and Hinduism and Native American beliefs and stuff. But when I cycled back, that was when it occurred to me that Jesus was somebody that the churches made him out to be. They interpret him a certain way, from the books that have been selected in the Bible to whatever. They've sort of interpreted him a certain way, a rational way, a way that he can be controlled. And that led me to realize that the Christ that incarnated Jesus, which I believe he was incarnated in Jesus, that Christ of the universe is the one that I'm actually following.
Mm.
So that power, that overarching power of the universe, that what you might call creator, is the Christ. It's the Christ light. It's the Christ of the universe, and that's where all of the gifts and all of the power and all of the light flow from. You talk about like universal whatever. It's all things are made by him and for him and through him, and I believe that. So that's kind of that sort of has become my starting point.
Mm-hmm. So, I want to touch a little bit upon that, because very often, and that's been my experience, shamanism is very often shown or described as a no-go for people that are quite religious. Even the practice of drumming, right? The idea to go in the underworld or underground, right? In the dark, to talk about shadow, to talk about things like that can be often painted. And I have had email about it or people on Instagram, sending me message as this is the work of the devil, right? There is that kind of very strong confrontation. But I think what I like about your book, and we'll come about the book later on, but you already provide some scriptural text, and I can see why you guys are interested in them and why you read them and how you brought them for those followers to kind of a green light, right? To go into shamanism and to deepen their faith and to have this direct experience, right? Both of you talk about this direct experience of something that you identify as Christ there. But can you talk a little bit just about that confrontation? And from what I understand, reading your book, you're really trying to build a bridge here, which is what really got me into the book, because that's what I received as a message during my initiation 15 years ago, to be that bridge, to be a bridge between different type of beliefs that maybe are not yet bridged fully or by, I would say, the majority. So can you talk a little bit about that confrontation and how do we resolve that if we come from maybe a background that's quite conservative, or if we come maybe with ideas that are quite boxed, to use your term, about who it is? Because the book is not Christ the ultimate shaman, right? It's Jesus the ultimate shaman. So you're talking specifically about that incarnation, and we're going to go into detail about what he did. But can you talk a little bit about that confrontation and how you can build that bridge, how you can ease that bridge and kind of avoid falling into those devil painting of the work of shamanism? Because I see it happening still today, right? There's still a major fight between native ways and religious ways, between the ways that are embodied or embedded into the earth connection and the ways that are separated, right? Isolated in a specific place, in a certain direction that is not really turning towards nature, the underworld, a diversity of spirits, which is so key to shamanism.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a few factors involved. Having been in that church box myself for many years, there's a lot of fear in people to say, wow, my pastor says this, and that's got to be true. And if I move outside of what he says, then I'm at risk for losing a relationship with God, creator, whatever. I'm at risk of going to hell. Some people, I shouldn't laugh because there's a lot of people that believe that. And I think a lot of it is based on fear. And a lot of it is based on community and how the community around each other says, you must conform. If you're going to be a part of this group, you must conform. Don't go out on your own and research and read and explore. And that, to me, is what shamanism, a lot of it is moving out, moving your spirit out to learn and grow.
Yeah. I remembered, I'm talking about years ago, being confronted by that. I was not raised in a spiritual family or, religious family. My parents were very open. They didn't baptize me. But a little bit like you, Sally, you were describing. I was born and raised in France, and we have amazing, very old churches and monasteries and cloisters. And my parents, my mother is a history major, and she would always bring us to those very ancient monuments. And she told me, I didn't remember it. I remember when I was 10 or 11 or 12. I didn't remember when I was very little, like 3 to 5. But she told me that every time we would go to a cloister, to a place there used to be monks, that I will want to go in that cloister and walk around like a monk. I would just start walking around with my head down and just walking. And she said it was very hard to get you out. You would scream. You would want it to be there.
Wow.
It came for me later on as I grew up and I became a teenager, where I had this fascination for cloisters and for this place of communion, right? And really was not in my education, was never, taught about it, never saw a Bible in my life until I went through a big breakdown. And I was a CEO of a big company and I was living in London. And I think I was 25. And I had such an emotional turmoil that day that I ran out of my office, found the first church that was there, entered the church, fell on my knees and started praying for the first time in a church. And I was, I think, 29 at the time. And I had this direct revelation, this direct connection. And that was the beginning of my journey with Christ, right? I didn't really know about shamanism at all at the time. It was really the beginning of my journey. But later on, as I got to explore a different path, and I wanted to get baptized, and I went to the local priest here at the Catholic Church, and he came to see me at my home. And I have this very big Buddha statue on my land, like life size, right? And he was really upset to see the Buddha statue in my garden. And he said, I can't baptize you if you have a statue like that in your garden. And we're talking about Buddha, right? Just Buddhism is not really even a religion, right? And that was my first shock. Long story short, years later, I met another pastor that was very open, very unorthodox, and had agreed to baptize me in the river with a Native American medicine man. So the two of them baptized me in the local river. So I found the way through it, right? But I got confronted to that. And I think you're right. There's that fear of losing the community, of not being in touch with that person that represent authority, right? Like the connection to God through someone instead of my direct connection and experience with spirit.
It's very powerful when you grow up, like I did in the Catholic Church, and then you say, I don't want this to do this anymore. And then it's kind of like you walk around, like, uh-oh, when is the lightning going to hit, kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah, but yes, a really good question. And I think honestly, when you read the Gospels, Jesus confronted, and use the word confronting. Jesus confronted all the time, all through his ministry. He was trying to open people up. He would say, "Hey, he was eyes to see, let him see. He was ears to hear, let them hear." And he wasn't talking about physical eyes and physical ears. He was talking about our spiritual senses. He was always trying to expand people's connection with spirit. And I one of the when Peter's out there and he's walking across the water, Jesus is, and I don't know if you believe that. I think he did it, but anyway, that's my deal. And Peter says, "Hey, if that's you, Lord, bid me to come." Jesus says, "Well, come on then." And he gets out of the boat. He's always calling us to a greater connection to spirit. And that, I think that's the struggle um, in with everybody is everybody that listens to your program, me, Sally. It's like, what's the next step that takes us deeper into spirit? Um, I think that's the life we live, is seeking spirit. But some people, they can't even read through the lines of scripture to see the deeper content, because I think their rationalism prohibits them from doing that. So, for instance, like I would say to a friend of mine, so in the gospel, when Jesus agrees to heal the centurion servant, there was a Roman centurion who had a servant that was sick, and he was really concerned about him. And he said to Jesus, just command it, and it'll be done. And Jesus said, I haven't found faith like that in all of Israel. And anyway, Jesus healed him remotely. And I asked people, how did he do that? How did he heal remotely? You ever thought about that? Well, it's because he was God. That's funny, because Sally and I, we kind of do some remote healings too. What? Yeah, yeah. So it's kind of like the quantum, it's like everything's connected. We're connected by spirit. So we reach through the ether and we connect with a person and we channel energy to them. And so I think people can get there if they can realize that, and this is why the book was written, is to say that the Jesus that you follow is the very one that was doing the very things that you say are wrong or demonic or not right, or you don't have anything to do with it.
Mhm.
But he's the very one that's doing the very things that you're denouncing. So, are you following what I'm saying?
I do, yeah. And I want to go into a little bit more detail about that, about those principles, the shamanic principles, those tools that Jesus was using based on the scriptures, right? Based on the writings that have been done about him. So
Yeah.
can you give us some example that really show that those are true shamanic principles that
Right.
are written in the sacred text? And how do they connect to more modern? I mean, shamanism is not modern, right? But what we see in shamanism today still.
Yeah. Well, when we talk about, do you mind if I answer
No.
this? First of all, the title Jesus, the ultimate shaman, Jesus is not really the ultimate shaman. I mean, will the real ultimate shaman please stand up? Oh, there isn't any.
Okay, so I'll call the author of the book to get the title changed a little bit.
Yeah. No, it was kind of a fun title. It was a way of creating that bridge between Jesus and shamanism. But I was looking at Marceau Eliad's book on shamanism the other day, and he says that there are certain shamans that the shamanic line comes down by blood, and people are trained within their family line, and then there's other ones that sort of gravitate into shamanism. And I think what gravitates people towards shamanism is spirit.
Hmm.
Spirit calls us to go deeper and deeper and deeper into that connection, and it ends up doing things like that Jesus did intuitively. Like the first thing he did when he started his ministry is You know, he went out into the desert and he fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. You know, why did he do that? Well, anybody that's ever been on a vision quest knows exactly why he did that. Because the things that we learn on vision quests change our life in a powerful way. And that's exactly what happened to him. It changed his life in a powerful way. But another example of that would be remote healings. Who gave him the idea that he could do a remote healing? I think he was intuitively connected to the spirit, so much so that he could connect himself through the spirit to. There were a number of remote healings that he did, I think 5 or 6, or probably even more. But he could connect himself, his spirit, with that person's spirit and channel energy to them.
Yeah, like a distant Reiki healing, for example, or other type of shamanic healing, right? That are done where the people are not present physically in the room, right? And can be very far away, not even, where at that moment that the healing is happening potentially.
Yeah. A lot of the work that Sally and I do is actually more often remote, but and then another example is when they're out in the boat and they're rowing the boat and they're on the Sea of Galilee and a big storm comes up, and he stands up in the boat, and basically what he does, he commands the elemental spirits, knock it off. Knock it off. And everything calms down. And I think that's to demonstrate that he has connection to spirit. And, Sally and I have seen that. We had a fire here that came really close to burning our town down. And 2 years ago. And I thought, what can we do? And I said, well, we'll just command the fire to go in the opposite direction. And that's what I did. I went out and I started talking to the fire. And I said, you don't belong here. Why are you doing this? We haven't done anything to you, and you need to go the other direction. Well, they were forecasting heavy winds that day and for the next 3 days, and the winds never came, and the fire got slowed up enough where the firefighters could come in and sort of get set up, so when the fire did eventually creep down the hill, they could put it out, and that's exactly what happened. But then at the people that have done our shamanic training, they have a ranch, Power Path. And the fire that was burning out there by Las Vegas, New Mexico, burnt up to their property. And we were on a conference call, and I told them about my experience of pushing that fire back. And several of the people that were on the call, apparently they started doing that. I started doing it too. Mm-hmm. And what happened was the fire stopped literally at their border and went around into the north. So, I mean, it's those kinds of things that if people could realize that we have power to work with elemental spirits, then we would be doing sort of what Jesus did when he stood up in the boat and said, chill out.
Yeah, which is a very known and common skills of many medicine men that I know and I've worked with to be able to command the weather, right? The rain, the wind, the elements. Yep. So you talk a little bit about Jesus' initiation, right? Going into vision quest and, going into silent moments, definitely a vision quest from the description, in the scriptures, it's very evident there. But how do someone, I want to go back to the book, but how do we develop those skills? If you can tell a little bit from that perspective of Jesus, from that perspective of what you study, how do we develop this intuition and that capacity to deeply listen, to be able to perform that commandment, or maybe that's a little bit of a strong word, but to be in better connection to the spirits, because like you say, we live in such a rational society, right? That our mind is so constrained by science and fears that it might be very difficult to connect to that intuition and to have true faith, right? It's one thing to have our faith in our head and think that, okay, creator exists, I believe there's a God. It's another one to have it in our heart, to truly believe. And Jesus talks about that, right? Those who have seen and believe are great, right? But those who have not seen and still believe are, even closer to God, right? So how do we do that? How do we believe when we haven't seen the miracle, when we don't maybe have performed the miracle yet? I think if Jesus in front of us and put his hand down and the person stand up and walk out perfectly healed, well, I would believe in that, right? But how do, in our modern world, do we return to that kind of wisdom and that capacity to listen and to find back this intuition that we carry, that I believe we all have, right?
Absolutely. And I believe fundamentally, much of it is realizing that it's not our power. It's our faith in the power that works through us to perform these things. It's not that I'm so great or, it's that I'm a vessel for this power to work through with my intention of asking for healing or the wind or fire, those kinds of things, to realize that the power moves through us. It's not like, well, how can I go to the gym and get enough power to be a shamanic practitioner? It's just, I don't know that there is a gym like that. That'd be really cool if there was. But I think primarily that's a number one basic thing that needs to be understood. And second of all, you spoke about intuition. And I think there is a fear factor, faith and fear factor, that have to learn to work together. Again, when we realize it's our intention, it's our desire, strong desire, which would be an intention. And then we call on the power to come through. And it's important that we learn to listen. To me, intuition is all about listening. And I have a whole chapter in the book about learning to develop your intuition, because going through life in a powerful way involves us making wise choices and asking for input and wisdom, and then being open to receive whatever it is without judgment or without already having a preconceived idea of what that should be. But we ask for wisdom and it comes, and then we act on that. So that's a simple explanation.
Yeah, and there is something that also relate to a question someone is asking, which is the idea of faith, right? And very often, people think, okay, I just believe in that, right? And I asked a medicine man years ago about it. He said, I don't believe I know. I don't believe in God. I know God. He said something like that, right? He had a personal experience with it. And I feel very often, it's not often that we have a direct manifestation maybe of that power, not for everyone, not all the time. But for me, those have been the crucial moments, going from a faith that I feel was very much in my head to a faith that really dropped into my heart. And I have, hundreds of examples now on how those prayers, those calling have manifested into my life in ways that are unexplainable otherwise. So how do we really go from based on your experience, from that belief, that faith, right? That we have faith in the scriptures, or we have faith in the Christ, to really have this real factual base that, okay, this is true. This is not just a belief anymore. It's just me having faith into that force, into those spirits, into those texts. But I really know for a fact that this is God, or this is the creator, or this is the universe forces that are already working here through me. And maybe a tricky question, by the way. I realize maybe
it's a great question. It really goes to the heart of what we're all about. To me, the faith that Jesus was talking about was the faith of the heart, not the faith of the head. Because you can believe all you want, but it's like, so what, you know? But I think, to me, things really started to change for me when I started to open up to spirit and say, well, I talk in the book about, I don't know if you remember this, but us having two radars. One's the physical and one's the spiritual. And in fact, I work for a company. I'll tell you this little story. Is that there's a defense weapon on a ship, Navy ship, called the Phalanx, and basically it's a modern day Gatling gun, and it's a last line of defense before a missile comes in and blows the ship up, and we don't want that. So we went out. I was working for a company. We went out to look at this thing to see how it worked, because we were going to design something for it. And I said, how does this thing work? Is basically we have two radars. One tracks the incoming bogey, and the other one tracks the outgoing rounds, and they pull the two pictures together, and we blow up the target. And I walked away from that, and I was thinking, huh. And then Spirit said to me, yep, you got those radars. You got the physical turned on. You just don't have your spiritual one turned on. And I went, okay. So from then on, I started to ask Spirit, okay, when I meet this person, what do I need to sense about them? Or what do you want to do with them or for them? How can I respond to them? And that puts me in a heart mode, because then I have compassion. And it's compassion that drove Jesus' ministry, by the way. It's always about compassion. So I have compassion to bring whatever that person, it could be a word of knowledge, could be a word of wisdom. I don't know, something that they may have a need, maybe nothing at all. But I've got my spiritual radar turned on, and I'm just sensing as we talk about what Creator wants me to do with them, and little by little, as I listen, little gracelets, little spiritual gifts start to come, like a word of knowledge, like something I wouldn't have known about them, and it filters in and says, here, you know. It's like when Jesus said, when he met the woman at the well, Samaritan well, and he said, go call your husband. And she says, I don't have a husband. He says, and you say right, because the last 5 men that you were with, they weren't your husbands either. And then she looks at him and says, how do you, if I got that wrong, sorry, I probably did. But anyway, how is it that, you know these things, you know? And then he goes on to really kind of develop a conversation. He takes it down to a heart level, from a head to a heart level with her. And that's what these words of knowledge or words of wisdom or discernment. Discernment's a big thing when you're working with somebody, and you get this sense like, hey, there's something you're really struggling with, and or you sense something like a shadow on that person, you know. And you ask the Spirit, what do you want me to do with that? Do you want me to say anything or not? So I think what happens is, we are in a place where we can really care about each other, if we open ourselves up to intuition and listening right then and there with everybody we meet.
Which is really it's interesting because I had a conversation last week with one of my elder, and he say, you know, you need to decide if you want to choose your belief or if you want to choose connection. Because
Perfect.
you cannot have one or the other. It's one or the other. You cannot have both, right? So at some point, you say you are going to have to decide if what's more important to you is your belief, which I take it as my mind in some ways, right? Or do you want connection? Do you want to stay connected? And you kind of have at some point to let that go. And I feel, you know, very much of that descent into my heart, right? I can read very often, you know, one of my favorite scriptures is Jeremiah. I love the prophet and I love the way he talks to God, and he's very confronting to God. And I like that. He has a very direct discussion with God about, well, he doesn't really want to be a prophet to start with, right? Because people think,
he doesn't.
yeah, like none of them really want, because they usually get arrested and tortured or killed, right? And he really goes to God and said, listen, I just don't, I have enough of that. I can't go. People think I'm crazy. I've been pushed away from my community, and you ask me to stay that. And when I say it, people laugh at me and people push me. And God basically listened for like, I don't know, for quite a while. And he's like this angry child, right? He's just like screaming at her. And at some point, God tell him, say, okay, are you finished? He's like, okay, yeah, I'm done. Kind of the tantrum is gone, right? She said, okay, so now here's what you're going to go tell them. She basically keep going. And in the English translation, or the more modern translation of the text, it say, God abused me, of, you say, you abuse me, right? And I let myself being abused. But the original Aramaic text, the ancient text, says, he says to God, you raped me, and I let myself being raped. So it's a much more, basically, it says you had a physical intercourse in me, and I let myself that happen. And that's what he really tells God, right? So it's very visceral. It's very emotional, right? Yeah. And we can really feel that dilemma very often of those prophets in it. But what I want to go into is that we can very much read all those texts from our mind and our head, and saying, do we believe it? Have an opinion? Take it to an extreme. Well, you know, Christian did this or that religion did that. So have a very mind belief system when we read them. Or we can drop into our heart and feel into the words. And that's usually when we can experience the transformation, or we can experience the connection, right? And I feel then the belief might come back into our head, right? Then we believe, but it's coming from the way up, not from the way down. And I feel like this is really, I love your idea of radar, because that's really what it is, right? What do I activate in that moment? Do I come and I judge because you're quoting a scripture, or you're talking about Jesus, and I come with all my mind filters? Or do I want to connect to your words and feel the energy and be curious and have compassion? Well, I might disagree, but have compassion and curiosity and stay connected there. And then my heart open. And then they tell us when it opens, we connect to spirits, right? That's when God can really flow through.
Yeah.
So I think that didn't really happen with the religion, right? I mean, many religions, not all of them, by the way. I go to church every Sunday with an amazing pastor, so there's really nothing against religion, but he has this capacity to open my heart. To not make me feel strange in that context. And despite I practice something quite different, but still feel so much love, very often having tears dropping down my face in some of the words, because I can really feel them in my heart.
Right. So I wanted to, and I love what you just said about belief versus connection, because I think that's just a simple way of talking about what we're all doing. It's kind of like the rabbit saying to Alice in Wonderland, you know, how far down the rabbit hole do you want to go? How deep a connection do you want to have? What are you willing to do to pursue that? And you know, but I think, you know, when I first got into shamanism, I was looking at the drumming, and I was looking at the rattle, and I was looking at, you know, the sage we burn, or the mapacho, or the more I'm around that stuff, the more I'm thinking, what if you're just out on the street and you stop and talk to somebody, and what if you don't have those things? Well, I'm shit out of luck, I guess, because then I don't have all my shamanic shit with me. You know, I'm reaching in my pocket, I don't have anything to use. You know, it's like, well, you really do. You have connection. You have spirit. And if you'll just stop and really listen to that person, and then invite spirit into this process, what do you have for me? What do you have for that person? Maybe I walk away learning something from them, and that's what that whole thing was about. Or maybe I pass something to them, or maybe there's a healing that's going to come a certain way. I don't know.
Well, the whole healing ministry of Jesus was out there, right? He was in the street, not only in the street, but he was on the edges of society, right?
Yep.
With the people that were rejected. He
Yes.
was with the immigrants. He was with the prostitutes. He was with the people that were not part of the system. And when he were with the system, usually he would make a big mess, right? Or the establishment, right? He was trying to really dismantle the establishment. So I think in his ministry, in his ways, he was very much what a medicine men are, which very often in communities, by the way, either it's in the jungle in Peru that I've experienced that, or in other part of the world, the medicine man doesn't always live in the center of the community. He's always a bit on the edge. He's in the forest, right? He's somewhere you need to go find him, despite he's accepted, right? But he lives that life that is connected to the community, but also is a little bit on the edge. Mm-hmm. In the street, right? Like you say, right? He's not in his church. He's not in his temple. He's not in his maloka. He's out there where the pain is, in connection to it.
All of our growth, when we think we have it all down, we have nothing else to learn, right? I know all the answers. I have it all together. I know all the Bible scriptures. I know all the prayers, whatever is entailed in that. And I think the people on the fringe are there because they don't have all the answers. And that's where we can come to that fringe spot. All of us, if we're honest, we're all on the edge at some point with something. I think I find that in my practice anyway. And that's where we learn, and that's where we can be healed, when we open to that mystery and say, man, I am really having a problem with this area, or I need an answer to this because I have no clue where to go with this. Mm-hmm. It's being open to that mystery of saying there's more out there than me. And that to me is a beginning point. And that's why I think Jesus was on the fringe.
Yeah, but that's the fear.
Oh, absolutely.
That's why we don't move out, is because I don't want to put myself in a position where spirit might not answer me. Mm-hmm. And then I'm like sitting there like naked and afraid.
Yeah, my pastor often say, you know, she's not in the center, she's on the edges. Mm. Yeah. In our edges and in the edges of society. And I just found that quote, when he told me that, it just resonated so deeply on how and where I find my connection to spirit.
Wow. That's cool.
Say, look, it's on the edge, right? If you stay in the center and the comfort, like you say, Sally, right? In what I know, in how I see, I'm kind of dead there, right? I mean, I might feel very grounded and present, but in fact, I'm not really meeting what has been pushed away, what is isolated, what is maybe screaming from far away, what needs my help.
Well,
that
that's what
needs my attention.
vulnerability is so hard. It's hard for us to be vulnerable in our own minds with our own self, and it's hard to be vulnerable with other people. And yet that's where the healing is. It's being vulnerable and being open and saying, I don't know. So lead me to the right direction here.
So have we kind of killed that spirit when we put it into a building, when we put it with walls around, when we put it into very much sometimes a mind centric and get it out of the heart? I mean, there's many churches out there that do amazing work with the poor and with so many amazing activity, right? But some version of it can be kind of removing him from where he was, right? From where he was getting his healing power. And maybe that's why the healing power are kind of gone, maybe, or that capacity to connect so deeply to spirit.
I think from what I've seen, going to a Christian seminary, what I was taught. In fact, I'm writing a book on life in the spirit and spiritual gifts, and hopefully it'll be published in a couple months. And I asked this whole question of what's happened to the church where you don't see pastors like drawing the spiritual gifts of people out, like prophecy and apostleship and healing. And where's the healers in the churches? And discerners and word of knowledge and word of wisdom and administrators and all these gifts that we're told that people have, plus a lot more. And I think a lot of it is when I went to seminary, I was taught Greek and Hebrew, so I could do the translation. And then I took all my theology classes, and then I took my preaching classes, and then they graduated me. And they said, there you go. Get out there and get in that pulpit and teach that truth because you're superhuman now. You're super smart. And it was just like, holy cow, what are you talking about? Thank God I didn't pastor. Not like I did, but it was more informally. But it is really what happens is when pastors get into churches, when you're around people that are struggling to learn to do this process of shifting from belief to connection, and like somebody wrote up on the screen there, faith is action. It's a dirty process.
Mm.
It's like babies that have diapers that like the poop spills out, and as a parent, we've all experienced that. It's like, ooh, wow. All right, so from now on, you can't go to the bathroom anymore because this is uncomfortable. But that's what's happened a lot in the churches is that people try to speak prophetically and they don't do it exactly right. Instead of coming alongside and saying, "Here, let me teach you." I think the problem is that many pastors don't know even what their own spiritual gifts are. They assume that because they're preaching that they have a teaching gift, and they really don't. Maybe they have some other gift like service or helps or something, mercy, or mercy, compassion. But anyway, what happens is they end up not training their people how to how to use these powerful power gifts that we have.
Mm.
And so what happens is the church dampens down, and pretty soon it just becomes an intellectual thought exercise. I go and I listen to what you have to say. It all goes in here, and maybe hopefully a little gets down here, but most of it's up here. And so that whole notion of moving from belief to connection is not facilitated. Some churches they do,
Yes, or even some, I guess, some part of the church, right? I'm thinking about the Franciscans or other type of currents, right? I've been fascinated by the life of Saint Francis, which was definitely a medicine man, a shaman, in the way he lived,
Oh my God.
and living in the forest and walking with animals, and the way he was connected to spirituality, and even suffering very much with his personal health, the fate of many medicine people, right? That has this huge burden to carry, and still are in service to the world, right? So there is many example, in fact, in the Christian faith. I mean, the prayer of Saint Francis, right? One of his most famous prayer is literally a prayer that you would hear around a shamanic ceremony, around a fire, around a sweat lodge, around a vision quest, summoning and talking to the sun and to the moon and to the wind and to the waters. And I'm even surprised that this prayer survived and is still alive today, because for me, there's also here this very direct connection between shamanism and Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, Sally.
I'm not a scholar. Steve is way more scholar than me. But I think that's what happened, is that when the Bible was put together, it was put together to have a certain effect. And there were scriptures that weren't manuscripts that weren't included because they didn't go along with that end idea. I absolutely go with you with that.
And it was written, many, many years later, right? It was not written at the time really it was happening. And it was also written in the creation of a church, right? Which was very different from Jesus' ministry, which didn't really have a church, right? It was not Christianity yet. And he was a rabbi, right? I'm guessing everybody knows that here, but he was coming also from a different faith than the one that was born. And we made the church really Jesus-centric instead of Christocentric in many ways, right? Or instead of centered on God, we made it very centered on that person, on that incarnation, which I think also is not something that he ever asked or talked about or requested or even envisioned, maybe. I don't know.
Well, we forget about all the other things, like the animals who look at the story of Noah. There's so many. There was who was it? See, I'm not the scholar. Was on the fast, and the bird came and fed him. Elijah.
Yeah.
The bird came and fed him. There's just so many instances in scripture and in our lives when we pay attention of nature and creation that work along with us to strengthen us and to help us along our journey.
Yeah.
Raven. Yeah. It's my Raven.
So in the book, you talk a lot about those, shamanic principles and the connection to the ministry of Jesus, and also how to develop that intuition and those spiritual listening skills. There's a good chapter on that. I would love to talk a little bit now about those shamanic practices that a beginner would need to learn, or the things that you feel, there's so many out there, but what are the ones that you see that are important, and if you can make the connections to Jesus or to the Christ, right, and how they fit into that umbrella. We don't have to go through all of them, but I'd love to hear from a few that you mentioned in the book or that you feel are relevant to mention now.
Are you talking about practices or tools?
Practices or tools that people can use, either tools of shamanic practitioner or practices that people can do to open that gift, right? To get that connection open in the context of that bridge that we are talking about, maybe.
I think Steve mentioned one is a vision quest, going out. I don't think that you have to do a a whole vision quest thing. You can spend time in meditation. You can spend time in prayer, in stillness, in going out in creation, and learning to listen and not be distracted by life. I think that is a really good skill. And I think that, I mean, Jesus did that. He was a really good listener through his life and how to touch people, connecting with his intuition, because he was a good listener. And when he knew he was getting too much from the outside, that he needed to still his heart, he'd go off by himself. You see that over and over, that he went off to a quiet place. And I think that's one way. That's, I know Steve will talk too, but that's one way that everyone can do.
Yeah, that was way before we see internet and smartphone and all the massive amount of distraction that we have now that makes our head even more noisy, right?
Well, I thought you were on a good track. I was sitting there enjoying listening to you.
Oh, thank you.
When we wrote the book, there's a lot of practices that shamans do, like soul retrievals or other stuff like that. That you should have somebody kind of teach you how to do them, mentor you in them. But then we kind of got to talking, and we realized that there were a lot of things that people were already doing that move you in that direction towards connection. So like meditation is one. You know, anybody that meditates is clearly steering into a path. And you know, I had a friend of mine who the gal used to listen to a phone meditation thing. And she was using it to calm herself down, but I think eventually she'll find her way into saying, "Wow, this goes deeper." If she continues it. So meditation would be one of the shamanic oriented practices, and then getting away by yourself, doing sometimes just a 1 day fast, 2 day fast, 3 day fast, getting off by yourself, clearing the static, um, tuning in would be another way.
I think there are many tools. When we wrote the book, our intention, again, you talk about the bridge. We're talking to different groups of people, right? People who follow shamanism are familiar with rattles and drums and all the mapacho, all those things that are used, right? And people who are probably in a church on the other side have no idea, and they may have been taught those things will lead you astray. So we decided to kind of go down the middle and do some very basic explaining in our book. We don't go over a lot of things because if someone was to desire to learn more about being a practitioner, they really need to mentor with someone to do those things. It's serious work. You're working with negative entities. You're working with, you could call it possession. You're working with dark spirits. Those are things that you need to be mentored in before you walk into doing that kind of interface, because you better darn know what you're about and whose you are and what energy you're working with. So we went on a very basic way. We talk about the rattles and the drums, which are wonderful because vibration helps break up energy. So, it's a wonderful way to prepare yourself or a group for time together for discussions, because you break up all that energy of people that have had a hard day, or even yourself, and in your private time, sit and shake that rattle and just clear yourself of distractions. It's kind of the same as going off by yourself. It's a way to clear so that you can listen better.
A lot of people are tuned into using sage. It's become a I don't, a lot of markets I walk into and I look down and go, oh, there's a little sage bundle. Huh, that's cool. So, I mean, I was in a store the other day in Beatty, Nevada on my way home from Oregon. There's a little stop and rob. There's a sage bundle in there. I'm thinking, I should ask the guy. But the fact that people are accessing stuff like that means they're using it, and this is becoming more common. So we tried to show stuff like that, like a sage, like burning sage and smoking yourself, and cleansing yourself is a way to do that. Or like Sally pointed out, is people pick up feathers. They're drawn to a feather, and so then you connect with the spirit of that feather, the spirit of the animal of the feather. Or another thing we point out is connecting with, like, a lot of people, you'll say, if you ever, like, through your life, you ever connected with a particular animal, and then they'll kind of think and go, oh yeah, yeah, for sure. Like, I had this experience when I was a kid with a hawk. And ever since then, I noticed the hawk comes around at certain times. It's like, well, okay. Well, why don't you build on that? So we kind of take real common themes and try to help people to build on them without, like, developing full blown shamanic practice.
Yeah, that's what I really enjoy about your book, by the way. And clearly, shamanic trainings is a lifelong trainings, right? And you need mentors, and traditionally, that's how they always been done, right?
Right.
But I think there is definitely, I mean, I just feel it, a very unusual profile of people that now comes for trainings or come for, shamanic healing. People that I would say 10 years ago would have never probably pushed the door of such practice. People that are coming more from the material corporate world, but who have those uh, feelings, those callings, like you're talking about, Steve, right? They say, I don't know, I keep seeing that, or I keep hearing that, or I'm feeling there is just something deeper, either through dream state or either through their normal life, right? Either through what they call coincidence, and it's very common now that I see people that I'm sure 10 years ago, I've never had anybody like that walking into that door. So there's definitely spirits, that's how I say it, right? Spirit is just putting the volume up because it's time to listen. But I think also, yeah, the Western world doesn't really have a lot of tools or places of, doesn't have any rite of passages, doesn't have any initiation, and so doesn't have the answer when people are confronted
Yes.
with such calling, right?
Yeah, it's true.
So we're getting at the end of our talk today. So I really, really recommend people to get the book, and we'll put a little link under. I think it's just a beautiful writing, and I think you've done a really good job, which is not easy to bridge those two sides. And yeah, I hope you're getting more praised email than angry email for that book. I was thinking about that. But I want to, yeah, maybe the last word that you want to share, Sally or Steve, maybe something we haven't talked about or something you want to tell people before we go, and then I'll close the space, and thanks everyone.
I just have my encouragement for anyone who's listening is to set aside your fear. There's nothing to fear. There's only love and goodness and acceptance that can help build yourself into a human being that can be healed and have leftover to give to others, to our world. We need that right now. So don't be afraid. Step out.
Do not be afraid. It's many times in the scripture, right? If I'm not mistaken, Steve, you're probably more a specialist than me on that, but do not fear is very present, right? The heart path. And,
yeah, perfect love casts out fear. If we're in the love track, this fear goes away.
Yeah.
Yep.
One of my elder teachers, Native American, say, you know, to not choose that program, because then we participate in that program and we also invite things that we don't want to invite into our field.
Oh my
Absolutely.
gosh.
To be aware, right, that it is there. Obviously, it's a human emotion, but that we also have a choice at some point, and to really be aware of that when we are called into by other spirit into another program, and to always return to that path, that light, that love. Thank you so much, Sally. Thank you, Steve. Thank you to everyone that joined live. Thank you to everybody that's listening on the podcast, on the YouTube channel. If you have any questions, feel free to put them under the recordings, and you can also find the different links to reach out to Sally and Steve to get the book if you feel called by it. I really enjoyed it, so I really recommend it. So I hope you had a good time. Wishing everyone a beautiful evening and a blessed rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.